Thomas Gates had spent 20 years learning how to end lives efficiently. Now he spent his days trying to figure out how to braid his daughter's hair. The irony wasn't lost on him as he sat at the kitchen table, watching 8-year-old Emma demonstrate the proper technique on her doll. His fingers, once trained to assemble weapons in pitch darkness, fumbled with the pink ribbons. "No, Daddy, you have to cross them over, not under," Emma said, her voice carrying that particular patience children reserve for their hopeless parents. Thomas smiled. This was the life he'd chosen when he'd retired from the SEALs 3 years ago. No more deployments to places that didn't exist on maps. No more weeks of silence broken only by the sound of his own breathing through a rebreather. Just breakfast with his daughter, coaching her soccer team on weekends, and the mundane beauty of ordinary life in suburban Virginia. His wife, Cheryl, walked into the kitchen, already dressed for her job at the hospital where she worked as a nurse administrator. "Don't forget the barbecue at my parents' house today. 4 o'clock. Thomas's smile tightened slightly. Walter Douglas, his father-in-law, was a retired insurance executive who'd made his money denying claims and his reputation by dominating every room he entered. The man had opinions about everything: how Thomas should invest, what car he should drive, how he was wasting his potential by not leveraging his military background into some high-powered security consulting gig. Looking forward to it, Thomas lied smoothly. 20 years of covert operations had taught him when to blend in. "Be nice," Cheryl said, kissing his cheek. "Daddy's just trying to help. He means well." Thomas had heard that refrain for the entire 6 years of his marriage. Walter Douglas didn't mean well. He meant to control, to diminish, to establish dominance. But Thomas had learned to ignore it, to smile and nod while thinking about the garden he was planning or Emma's upcoming birthday party. The barbecue started predictably. Walter Douglas held court on his expansive deck, a sweating glass of bourbon in hand despite the afternoon heat, surrounded by Cheryl's 2 brothers, Devin and Jesse, who laughed at their father's jokes with the practiced enthusiasm of men who'd learned early that disagreeing came with consequences. Thomas manned the grill, flipping burgers while Emma played in the yard with her cousins. He'd positioned himself where he could keep an eye on her, an old habit from a life where situational awareness meant survival. "Thomas," Walter's voice boomed across the deck. "Cheryl tells me you're still doing that handyman nonsense. When are you going to use that GI Bill, get an MBA, make something of yourself?" "I'm happy with what I'm doing," Thomas replied evenly. Happy doesn't pay for Emma's college. Happy doesn't build wealth. Walter swirled his bourbon. "You know, I could introduce you to some people. Real opportunities. But you have to want it." Thomas had long ago stopped trying to explain that his military pension, combined with his savings and the modest income from his handyman business, provided everything his family needed. Walter Douglas measured success in square footage and stock portfolios. He couldn't comprehend a man who'd walked away from the power he'd once wielded. "Daddy, can I have juice?" Emma appeared at his elbow, her face flushed from playing. "Sure, sweetheart. There's some on the cooler by Grandpa." He watched Emma skip over to the deck, reach into the cooler, and pull out a juice box. What happened next occurred in the kind of slow motion that Thomas had experienced only in combat. Emma turned, juice box in hand, and collided with Walter, who'd been gesturing expansively with his bourbon. The juice box burst, spraying orange liquid across Walter's white shoes, expensive Italian leather that he'd been bragging about earlier. "You stupid little..." Walter's hand shot out, grabbing Emma's shoulder. Thomas was already moving, his burger flipper clattering to the ground. Walter shoved Emma backward. She stumbled, and then his foot came up, driving into her stomach with the force of a man who'd once played college football. Emma crumpled. Thomas covered the distance in seconds, but Walter wasn't done. He kicked her again, his face purple with rage. "Ruined my goddamn shoes. Do you know how much these cost?" Thomas's hand closed on Walter's shoulder, spinning him around. Every instinct screamed at him to end this threat, to use the dozen techniques he knew to drop this man where he stood. Instead, he shoved Walter away, hard enough to send him stumbling back into a patio chair. "Emma," Thomas knelt beside his daughter, who was gasping, tears streaming down her face. "Baby, I've got you. I've got you." He lifted her gently, assessing for damage with the same efficiency he'd once used on wounded teammates in the field. Her breathing was shallow, rapid. Possible internal injuries. Thomas, what the hell? Cheryl appeared, but she was looking at Walter, not Emma. Daddy, are you okay? Thomas stared at his wife in disbelief. Are you serious right now? You pushed him. He could have been hurt. He kicked our daughter. Twice. She ruined his shoes. They were expensive. She should know better than to run around like that. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Thomas looked at Cheryl, really looked at her, and saw something he'd been refusing to acknowledge for years. This wasn't the woman he'd married. Or maybe it was, and he'd just been too busy surviving deployments to notice how deep her father's programming ran. We're leaving. He carried Emma toward the gate. Don't you dare walk away from me. Walter had recovered his composure, his voice dripping with entitled rage. You put your hands on me in my own house. You're done. You understand? Done. Thomas didn't respond. He was already calculating the fastest route to the emergency room, already running through the list of injuries that could result from blunt force trauma to a child's abdomen. Cheryl caught up with him in the driveway, her face flushed. You're overreacting. She's fine. Kids are resilient. Get in the car or don't. Your choice. Thomas buckled Emma into her booster seat, her small body still trembling. Cheryl got in the passenger seat, her phone already out, texting furiously. Probably to her father, Thomas thought. Probably apologizing for her husband's behavior. The emergency room doctor was a tired-looking woman in her 50s who listened to Thomas's explanation with a neutral expression of someone who'd heard worse. She examined Emma thoroughly, then ordered an ultrasound. 2 hours later, the doctor returned with results that made Thomas's blood run cold. Your daughter has a lacerated spleen and internal bleeding. We need to admit her immediately for observation. If the bleeding doesn't stop on its own, she'll need surgery. How did this happen? The doctor's eyes were sharp now, professional concern shifting into something harder. Someone kicked her at a family gathering. Someone? Who? Thomas hesitated. He'd learned in the military that words, once spoken to authorities, became ammunition that could be used in ways you didn't anticipate. But Emma was lying in a hospital bed, pale and small, and there was only one answer that mattered. My father-in-law, Walter Douglas. The doctor nodded slowly. I'm required by law to report this to Child Protective Services and the police. A detective will want to speak with you. Cheryl had been silent throughout the examination, sitting in a corner chair, her phone dark for once. Now she stood. Thomas, can I talk to you outside? In the hallway. She rounded on him with surprising ferocity. You can't say that to the police. Do you understand what you'll do to this family? What I'll do? Your father put our daughter in the hospital. It was an accident. He was upset about his shoes. He wasn't thinking clearly. You know how much those meant to him. Thomas felt something break inside him, something that had been bending for years under the weight of Douglas family dysfunction. His shoes meant more than Emma's safety. That's not what I said. Stop twisting things. If you go through with this, if you involve the police, my whole family will. Will what? Kick her harder next time? Cheryl's face went white. That's not fair. Fair? You stood there and watched him hurt our daughter, and you're worried about what's fair? A uniformed police officer appeared at the end of the hallway, and Thomas knew the doctor had already made the call. The next hour was a blur of questions, of Thomas repeating the same story while Cheryl sat silent. The officer, a middle-aged man named Luther Ayers, took notes with the mechanical efficiency of someone filling out paperwork. So your father-in-law kicked your daughter because she spilled juice on his shoes. Officer Ayers repeated, his tone suggesting he'd heard stranger things but not by much. Twice. She was already down when he kicked her the second time. Ayers glanced at Cheryl. Ma'am, did you witness this? Cheryl looked at Thomas, then at the officer. The silence stretched out, and Thomas felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, the foundation of his marriage crumbling in real time. It happened very fast, Cheryl finally said. I'm not sure exactly what I saw. Ayers closed his notebook. Look, Mr. Gates, I understand you're upset, but this is a family matter. Without a clear witness statement, without video evidence, it's your word against his. Best thing you can do is work this out within the family. Maybe some counseling. Work it out. My daughter has internal bleeding. Kids fall down, they get hurt. Sometimes grandparents are too rough when they discipline. It's not ideal, but getting the law involved. Ayers shook his head. That's just going to make things worse for everyone. Trust me. Thomas watched the officer walk away, watched Cheryl's shoulders relax now that the threat had passed, and felt a cold clarity settle over him. The police weren't going to help. The system that he'd served, that he'd nearly died for on 3 separate occasions, had just told him that his daughter's assault was a family matter. Fine. He knew how to handle things outside the system. He'd done it for 20 years in places where law was just a word in a dictionary. The rules had changed, but Thomas Gates had always been good at adapting. Emma was admitted for observation, the doctors monitoring her through the night. Thomas sat by her bedside, holding her small hand while she slept, sedated against the pain. Cheryl had gone home around midnight, claiming she had work in the morning. In the quiet of the hospital room, Thomas began to plan. Not with rage. Rage made you sloppy, but with a methodical precision that had made him one of the most effective operators in his unit. Walter Douglas had kicked a child and faced no consequences. He'd done it because he knew he could, because the system protected men like him, because in his world, power meant immunity. Thomas had spent 2 decades learning how to eliminate threats. He just never imagined he'd need to use those skills against his own family. But Walter Douglas wasn't family anymore. He was a target, and Thomas Gates never missed. The next morning, Emma's bleeding had stabilized. The doctors were cautiously optimistic that surgery wouldn't be necessary, but she needed to stay in the hospital for at least 3 more days. Thomas had called her school, arranged for homework to be sent, made all the practical decisions while running on no sleep and cold hospital coffee. Cheryl showed up at noon with a bag from home. Clothes, Emma's favorite stuffed rabbit, some books. She'd also brought divorce papers. "I think we need some time apart," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "My father spoke to a lawyer. He says with your military background, the way you pushed him yesterday, he could make a case that you're dangerous. That Emma might not be safe with you." Thomas almost laughed. The absurdity was perfect. Your father put her in the hospital, but I'm the danger. You're not hearing me. Daddy has resources. Connections. If you push this, if you keep insisting he did something wrong, he'll make your life hell. He'll take Emma. He'll make sure you never see her again. Is that a threat? It's reality. Cheryl set the bag down. I love you, Thomas. I do. But I love my family too. We can get past this, but only if you let it go. Apologize to my father. Move on. No. The word hung between them like a wall. Then sign these. I'll file next week. We can work out custody, and maybe in time. Cheryl trailed off, realizing how hollow it sounded. Thomas took the papers because it was easier than arguing. I'll have my lawyer look at them. After Cheryl left, Thomas sat in the visitor's chair and thought about the impossible position he'd been placed in. His wife had chosen her father over their daughter. The police had declined to act, and now he was being threatened with losing Emma entirely if he didn't fall in line. It was objectively a masterful manipulation. Walter Douglas had spent a lifetime learning how to win, how to use money and influence to reshape reality to his preferences. He'd kicked a child and turned it into leverage against the man who'd witnessed it. But Walter Douglas had never faced someone like Thomas Gates. That afternoon, while Emma slept, Thomas made a series of phone calls to old friends. Sam Livingston, who'd been his spotter in Iraq. Raphael Hatch, who'd gotten out and gone into private investigation. Preston Harvey, who now ran a gym that catered to ex-military and knew everyone in the veteran community. He didn't ask for help. He didn't explain the situation. He just reconnected, reminded people he existed, laid the groundwork for what came next. By the time Emma woke up, asking for ice chips and her tablet, Thomas had a plan. It would take a week, maybe less. And by the end of it, Walter Douglas would understand that some men couldn't be threatened, couldn't be bought, and definitely shouldn't have laid hands on their granddaughter. Emma came home on Wednesday, pale, but improving. The doctors had sent her home with strict instructions. No physical activity, careful monitoring, immediate return if symptoms worsened. Thomas set up a nest of blankets and pillows on the living room couch. positioned where he could see her from the kitchen. Cheryl had moved back to her parents' house. She'd taken clothes, toiletries, and her jewelry box, but left everything else. A half-hearted exodus that suggested she expected to return once Thomas came to his senses and apologized to her father. Thomas spent Wednesday afternoon cooking Emma's favorite foods: mac and cheese from scratch, chocolate chip cookies, homemade chicken noodle soup. Small acts of care that felt inadequate against the enormity of what had been done to her, but they were what he had. "Daddy," Emma looked up from the movie he'd put on for her. "Why doesn't Mommy live here anymore?" The question he'd been dreading. "Your mom and I are having some grown-up problems. But you know what? It doesn't change how much we both love you." "Is it because of what happened at Grandpa's house?" Thomas sat down carefully on the edge of the couch. "What do you remember about that?" "I spilled juice. Grandpa got really mad. Then my tummy hurt a lot." Emma's voice was small, uncertain. "Mommy said I should be more careful, that I shouldn't run around so much." The casual victim blaming from his own wife made Thomas's jaw clench, but he forced his voice to stay gentle. "Emma, listen to me. What happened was not your fault. Adults should never hurt children, no matter what. Do you understand? But I did ruin his shoes. Shoes don't matter more than people. Not ever. Not even really, really expensive shoes." Emma seemed to consider this, then nodded. "Okay, Daddy." She turned back to her movie, and Thomas returned to the kitchen, where he opened his laptop and continued his research. Walter Douglas had lived in the same house for 30 years, a sprawling property in an exclusive neighborhood with gates and security. He played golf every Thursday at the Fairmont Country Club, tea time at 2 o'clock. He had a standing poker game with his business cronies every Friday night at his house. He drove a Mercedes S-Class, black, with vanity plates that read Douglas. Everything about Walter Douglas's life screamed routine, predictability, the comfortable patterns of a man who'd never faced real consequences. Thomas had learned in the SEALs that routine was a vulnerability. It made you readable, exploitable. And Walter Douglas's routine was about to become his worst enemy. Thursday morning, Thomas took Emma to a follow-up appointment with her pediatrician. The doctor examined her carefully, checked her vitals, and declared her healing well. No contact sports or rough play for at least 6 weeks. Let pain be your guide. On the way home, Thomas stopped at a sporting goods store. He bought a baseball bat, aluminum, regulation length and weight. Nothing illegal about a baseball bat. Emma used to play t-ball before she'd moved on to soccer. It was perfectly reasonable to have one in the house. Except Thomas Gates hadn't thought about baseball in 20 years. That afternoon, while Emma napped, Thomas went to the gym that Preston Harvey ran. Preston was there, as Thomas had known he would be, supervising a training session. He was a big man, 6'3", 220, with the kind of presence that came from a decade in Special Forces. "Gates," Preston greeted him with a nod. "Heard you called. Want to get back into training. Been too long. Never too long. Got time now." Thomas spent the next hour working the heavy bag, reacquainting himself with the muscle memory of violence. His body remembered, even if his civilian life had tried to make him forget. Speed, precision, power. The fundamentals came back like breathing. Preston watched from across the gym, saying nothing. When Thomas finished, Preston handed him a towel. "Heard about your daughter. Raphael mentioned it." Thomas didn't ask how Raphael knew. The veteran community was tight-knit, and news traveled. "She's home now." "Good." Preston paused, choosing his words carefully. "You need anything, you know where to find me." "Appreciate it." Thomas showered, changed, and drove home to relieve the neighbor who'd been watching Emma. He made dinner, helped Emma with the homework her teacher had sent, and read her 3 chapters of the book they were working through together. And at 11 o'clock, after Emma was asleep and the house was dark, Thomas left through the back door, baseball bat in hand. Walter Douglas's house was 40 minutes away. Thomas parked 3 blocks over in front of a house that had a for sale sign in the yard. He checked earlier, vacant, no alarm company stickers, no cameras. He walked the rest of the way, keeping to the shadows, avoiding the streetlights with the automatic precision of years of night operations. The Douglas house had security cameras, but Thomas had studied the angles online using Google Street View and tax records that showed property layouts. There was a blind spot on the south side, where a large oak tree blocked the view. The fence was 8 feet, wrought iron, but Thomas cleared it with an ease that surprised him. 3 years out, and his body still remembered how to move. Walter's Mercedes was parked in the circular driveway. The house was dark except for a light in what Thomas knew was the master bedroom. Late enough that the staff would be gone, Walter and his wife Emily employed a housekeeper and a gardener, but both left by 6. Thomas didn't go for the front door. He went for the Mercedes. The bat came down on the windshield with a satisfying crunch. Safety glass spiderwebbed, but didn't shatter. Thomas hit it again, and again, methodical as a drumbeat. Then the side windows, the headlights, the hood. He worked in silence, every impact precisely controlled. 20 years had taught him how to destroy things efficiently. The front door flew open. Walter Douglas stood there in a bathrobe, face purple with rage. "What the fuck do you think you're?" He stopped when he saw Thomas's face in the driveway lights. "You." Walter's voice dropped. "You goddamn psycho. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead." Thomas took another swing, demolishing the passenger mirror. "Tell them I'm responding to a family matter. They love that. You're finished. I'll have you arrested, Thomas dropped the bat and closed the distance before Walter could finish the threat. His hand shot out, gripping Walter's bathrobe, pulling him close. "You kicked my daughter," Thomas said quietly. "She had internal bleeding. She could have died. And you're worried about your car. I barely touched her." "She's exaggerating. Kids do that." The casual dismissal, the complete lack of remorse, crystallized something in Thomas. This wasn't a man who'd made a mistake. This was a man who believed he was entitled to hurt people without consequence. Thomas released him, shoving him back toward the door. "This is what barely touched feels like. Remember that." He picked up the bat and walked away, back into the shadows. Behind him, he heard Walter screaming threats, promises of lawsuits and arrests and revenge. Thomas didn't look back. By the time Walter called the police, and Thomas was certain he would, Thomas was home, the bat cleaned and stored in the garage, his clothes in the washing machine, his alibi airtight. He'd stopped at a 24-hour grocery store on the way back, bought milk and bread, kept the receipt. Needed provisions for Emma, couldn't sleep, went shopping. Perfectly reasonable. The police showed up at 7 the next morning. Officer Ayers again, looking tired and annoyed. "Mr. Gates, your father-in-law's vehicle was vandalized last night. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that?" "No. Why would I?" "He says you did it. Says you threatened him." "Did he file a report about threatening him?" Ayers hesitated. "Well, no, but then I guess it's his word against mine. Family matter, right?" The officer's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Gates, I understand you're angry about what happened to your daughter, but taking the law into your own hands. I went grocery shopping at 11:30 last night. Giant Foods on Route 29. I have a receipt, and I'm sure they have security footage." Ayers looked like he wanted to say more, but legally there was nothing to pursue. Suspicion wasn't evidence. Stay away from Walter Douglas. "That's not a suggestion." "Happy to, as long as he stays away from my daughter." After the officer left, Thomas made Emma breakfast and checked the news on his phone. Nothing about vandalism, which meant Walter hadn't gone to the media. Good. The man still thought he could handle this quietly, use his influence to make Thomas heal. He had no idea what was coming. Friday brought flowers. A massive bouquet delivered to the house, with a card that read, "Thomas, we need to talk." "Walter." Thomas threw them in the trash. Friday night was Walter's poker game, his sacred tradition with 5 cronies from the business world. They played in Walter's study, drank expensive scotch, and congratulated themselves on their success. Thomas knew this because Cheryl had complained about it for years, how her father prioritized cards over family events, how her mother had to tiptoe around the house those nights. At 9 o'clock, Thomas called the Fairfax County non-emergency line and reported a noise disturbance at Walter's address. Loud music, possible party, lots of cars. At 9:30, he called again, this time reporting the smell of marijuana coming from the property. At 10, he made a third call, claiming he'd seen someone stumble out of the house and get into a car, possibly drunk. 3 calls from 3 different burner phones he'd bought that afternoon. The police responded to the third call. Thomas knew this because Raphael had friends in the department who kept him informed. 6 officers showed up to investigate possible drunk driving, found Walter's poker game, breathalyzed everyone. 2 of Walter's friends blew over the legal limit and were arrested on the spot. Walter called Cheryl at midnight, screaming. Thomas knew this because Emma's phone, still on the family plan, picked up Cheryl's side of the conversation when she called him immediately after. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Cheryl's voice was shrill with panic. "The police came to my father's house. Arrested his friends. He thinks you did this. How would I make police show up to his house? Don't play games with me, Thomas. His car now this. His car got vandalized. That's terrible. Maybe he has enemies from all those insurance claims he denied. This is serious. He's going to destroy you. He kicked our daughter hard enough to cause internal bleeding, Cheryl. I'm just getting started." He hung up before she could respond. Saturday morning, Thomas took Emma to her best friend's birthday party. A carefully managed 2 hours where Emma could sit and watch movies while other kids played active games. Her friend's mother, Jane Meyer, pulled Thomas aside. "I heard what happened at the barbecue," Emma told Madison. Jane's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I know Walter Douglas. My sister worked for him years ago. He's a bully. If you need character witnesses or anything for court, let me know." Thomas filed that information away. The walls were closing in on Walter, the social consequences building. Good. Saturday afternoon, while Emma was absorbed in a new puzzle, Thomas made a trip to Walter's country club. He wore khakis and a polo shirt, anonymous country club attire. He walked in like he belonged, nodded at the bartender, and settled at a table on the patio with a clear view of the golf course. Walter was on the back nine, laughing with his foursome. His replacement car, a rental sedan that looked painfully ordinary, was parked in the lot, and Thomas felt a small satisfaction at having stripped away even that small symbol of status. Thomas didn't approach. He just sat, visible, watching. Let Walter see him. Let him feel watched, hunted. It took Walter 3 holes to notice. Thomas saw the moment recognition hit, saw Walter's swing falter, the ball slicing into the rough. Walter said something to his playing partners, then started marching toward the clubhouse. Thomas left before Walter could reach him, disappearing into the parking lot. He made his point. Saturday night, Devin and Jesse Douglas came to his house. Thomas had been expecting them. Walter Douglas was a man who believed in shows of force, and his sons were the blunt instruments he used when subtlety failed. They arrived at 3 in the morning, trucks with rumbling engines loud enough to wake the neighborhood. Thomas heard them pull up, heard the doors slam. Emma was at Jane Meyer's house for a sleepover. Thomas had arranged it that afternoon, knowing this was coming. The Douglas brothers came to the front door with guns. Thomas could see them through the window, Devin carrying a Glock openly, Jesse with what looked like a hunting rifle. They didn't knock. They kicked the door, the frame splintering from a boot that weighed 220 plus the force of a man who'd played offensive line in high school. Thomas was ready. He'd been ready since Thursday, since the moment he decided that Walter Douglas needed to understand consequences. The house was prepared, lights off, furniture repositioned, every angle calculated. Devin came through first, gun leading. "Gates, get out here. Time to talk like men." Thomas hit him from the side, emerging from the shadow of the stairwell. A precise strike to the wrist that sent the Glock spinning, followed by a knee to the solar plexus that folded Devin in half. Jesse was bringing the rifle around, but he was slow, civilian slow, untrained slow. Thomas closed the distance before Jesse could aim, got inside the rifle's effective range, and drove an elbow into Jesse's jaw. The rifle clattered to the floor. Jesse swung wild, a haymaker with all his weight behind it. Thomas slipped it, countered with a combination that his body remembered from 1,000 training sessions: kidney, liver, temple. Jesse went down. Devin was recovering, trying to reach for the Glock. Thomas kicked it away, then grabbed Devin by the collar and drove him face first into the wall. Not hard enough to cause permanent damage, just hard enough to make a point. "Your father kicked my 8-year-old daughter," Thomas said quietly. "Twice. Ruptured her spleen. She almost died. You fucking touched him, you broke his car. Thomas slammed him into the wall again. And you brought guns to my house at 3 in the morning. What do you think happens next?" Jesse was trying to stand, blood streaming from his nose. Thomas released Devin and turned to face them both. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're going to tell your father that I'm not intimidated. And if anyone in your family comes near my daughter again, what happened here tonight will look like a friendly conversation. We'll have you arrested. Jesse managed through his broken nose. For what? You broke into my house with guns. I defended myself. Thomas picked up Devin's Glock, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and set both pieces on the mantel. I have security cameras. They've been recording since you arrived. Self-defense is legal in Virginia. It was a bluff. Thomas had no cameras, but the Douglas brothers didn't know that. They looked at each other, the bravado draining away as reality set in. They'd been sent to intimidate a former SEAL, and it had gone exactly as badly as anyone with sense would have predicted. Get out, Thomas said. They left, Jesse leaning on Devin, both of them battered and bleeding. Thomas watched them drive away, then surveyed the damage to his front door. It would need replacing, but that was fine. He could do it himself. By sunrise, as he'd promised, the Douglas brothers understood their mistake. Sunday was quiet. Too quiet. Thomas spent the day repairing his front door, installing a new frame and deadbolt, while Emma helped by handing him tools. She didn't ask about the damage, and he didn't volunteer an explanation. She was 8. She didn't need to know about midnight visits with guns. Cheryl called at noon. Are you insane? Devin and Jesse showed up at the emergency room. Jesse's nose is broken. They said you attacked them. They broke into my house at 3 in the morning with guns. They were trying to talk to you. With guns, Cheryl. Loaded firearms. In our home. The silence on the other end stretched out. Thomas could almost hear her recalculating, trying to find an angle that made her family's behavior acceptable. My father wants to meet, she finally said. Neutral ground. Just you and him. Tomorrow at 10, Riverside Park. No. Thomas, please. We have to resolve this before it gets worse. It got worse when he kicked Emma. Everything since then has just been response. He wants to apologize. Thomas almost laughed. Walter Douglas doesn't apologize. He makes deals. What's he offering? Cheryl hesitated, and Thomas knew he'd guessed right. He'll pay for Emma's medical bills. All of them. And he'll set up a college fund for her. $100,000. Hush money. It's a gesture. He's trying to make things right. He can make things right by turning himself into the police and admitting what he did. You know that's not going to happen. Then we have nothing to talk about. Thomas hung up and looked at Emma, who was coloring at the kitchen table, her movements still careful, protective of her healing abdomen. $100,000 was a lot of money. It could pay for a top-tier college, give her opportunities. But it came with a price, teaching her that violence could be excused with money, that powerful people didn't face consequences. No deal. Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Raphael Hatch showed up at 8, carrying coffee and a manila folder. Got something you need to see. They sat in the kitchen while Emma watched cartoons in the living room. Raphael opened the folder and spread out a series of photographs and documents. Walter Douglas isn't as clean as he pretends, Raphael said. I did some digging. Turns out 15 years ago, there was an incident at his company. A secretary filed a complaint claiming Walter had shoved her during an argument. Settled out of court. NDA, the whole thing buried. Thomas studied the documents. You're sure about this? I've got the court records. Sealed but not gone. And there's more. Raphael pulled out another sheet. 2 years ago, the country club banned him for a month after he got in a fight with another member. Witnesses say Walter threw a golf club at the guy's head. Club suppressed it to avoid publicity. He has a pattern. Violent temper, sense of entitlement, and enough money to make problems disappear. Raphael leaned back. The guy you're dealing with isn't just an asshole. He's dangerous. And he thinks he's untouchable. Not anymore. Raphael smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You need to be careful, Thomas. He's going to escalate. Men like that always do. Let him. After Raphael left, Thomas sat at the kitchen table and thought about what came next. He'd damaged Walter's car, disrupted his poker game, beaten up his sons. Calculated escalations designed to strip away Walter's sense of control. But Raphael was right. Walter would escalate. The question was how. And when? The answer came Tuesday afternoon. Thomas was at the grocery store with Emma, navigating the produce aisle, when his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. Mr. Gates? This is Madeline Fowler from Child Protective Services. I need to speak with you about your daughter, Emma. Thomas felt his stomach drop. What about her? We've received a complaint alleging that Emma is living in an unsafe environment. Specifically, that your home was recently involved in a violent incident and that you may be engaging in dangerous behavior that puts your daughter at risk. Walter. This was Walter's play. Use the system Thomas had already learned wouldn't help him. Turn it into a weapon. My home was broken into by two men with guns, Thomas said carefully. I defended myself and called the police. I have a report. Understand. However, we still need to conduct a home visit and interview Emma. It's standard procedure. Would tomorrow at 10 work for you? Of course. Thomas hung up and looked at Emma, who was holding a bag of apples, oblivious to the threat her grandfather had just unleashed. CPS could take her. Not permanently, probably, but they could place her in foster care during an investigation. Walter had found the one weapon that Thomas couldn't defend against with training or experience. The system. Madeline Fowler arrived at 10 o'clock sharp, a compact woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a warm briefcase. Thomas had spent the previous evening cleaning the house, making sure everything was perfect, stocked fridge, clean sheets, Emma's room organized and safe. Madeline conducted a thorough inspection. She checked the smoke detectors, looked in the medicine cabinet, examined the repaired front door. Then she sat down with Emma in the living room while Thomas waited in the kitchen, his heart pounding. The interview lasted 20 minutes. When Madeline emerged, her expression was neutral professional, impossible to read. Mr. Gates, I need to ask you directly. Have you ever struck your daughter? Never. Not once. And the incident at your father-in-law's house? Walter Douglas kicked Emma twice in the abdomen. She had a lacerated spleen. I have hospital records, doctor's statements, everything. Madeline made notes. And the break-in? Thomas handed her the police report he'd filed after the Douglas brothers left. Two armed men broke my door down at 3 in the morning. I defended myself. They left. I called the police. Why do you think someone filed a complaint about your parenting? Because I refused to let Emma's assault go unpunished. Madeline studied him for a long moment. Your daughter seems healthy, well-adjusted, and safe. Your home is clean and appropriately maintained. I don't see evidence of the concerns raised in the complaint. Thomas felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. So this is over? I'll file my report. However, Mr. Gates, I'm going to be direct with you. Someone with resources wanted me here. This complaint was detailed, specific, and designed to raise red flags. That someone is likely to try again. My father-in-law. I can't comment on that. But I can tell you that CPS takes all complaints seriously, even ones that appear to be filed in bad faith. If more complaints come in, we'll have to investigate each one. It could mean multiple home visits, multiple interviews with Emma. It's disruptive and stressful. What can I do? Document everything. Keep records. And consider whether there's a way to resolve the underlying conflict before it escalates further. After Madeline left, Thomas sat on the couch and stared at nothing. Walter had found his pressure point. The CPS complaint was just the beginning. He could file noise complaints, report child neglect, claim Emma wasn't attending school properly. Death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts, each one requiring Thomas to defend himself, each one putting Emma under scrutiny. It was elegant in a sociopathic way. Walter couldn't beat Thomas physically, so he was using the system to grind him down. Thomas needed to change the game board. That afternoon, he called Preston Harvey. I need a favor. Name it. Remember that reporter you know? The one who did the story on veteran homelessness. Stacy Bush. She's good people. Can you give me her number? Stacy Bush agreed to meet him at a coffee shop Wednesday morning. She was in her 30s, with ink-stained fingers and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd heard every excuse and lie the world had to offer. Thomas told her everything. The barbecue, Emma's injury, the police response, Walter's escalations, the CPS complaint. He showed her medical records, police reports, photographs of his destroyed front door. He held nothing back. This is a hell of a story, Stacy said when he finished. But I need to ask, why come to me? Why not handle this privately? Because Walter Douglas thinks he can use the system against me. I need the public to see what he is. You understand that once this story goes public, there's no taking it back. Your life will become very complicated. It's already complicated. Stacy studied him, then nodded. I'll need to verify everything. Interview witnesses, get official statements. If this checks out the way you say, I'll run it. But Gates, be sure. This is scorched earth. I'm sure. Thomas left the coffee shop feeling lighter. He'd started this wanting simple justice. Walter held accountable, Emma protected. But Walter had escalated to the point where simple solutions weren't possible. Fine. Thomas would escalate too. The story ran Sunday morning, front page of the local section. Retired Navy SEAL says police ignored child assault. Family retaliates with legal threats. Stacy had done her homework. She'd interviewed Jane Meyer and 3 other parents who confirmed Walter's reputation for aggression. She'd obtained statements from the secretary Walter had shoved 15 years ago, who was willing to break her NDA now that someone else had gone public. She'd even tracked down the country club member Walter had attacked, who confirmed the incident. The story painted a picture of a man with a pattern of violence, protected by money and influence, who'd finally gone too far and attacked his own granddaughter. It mentioned Thomas's military service, Emma's hospitalization, the police department's decision not to pursue charges. It quoted Officer Ayers saying, "Family matter," and let readers draw their own conclusions. By Monday morning, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets. By Tuesday, national news was calling. Thomas's phone rang constantly. Reporters, talk shows, advocacy groups. He declined most of them, but accepted 3. A local news interview, a segment on a national morning show, and a podcast that focused on failures in the justice system. He told the same story each time, calm and factual. He never raised his voice, never exaggerated. He just laid out what had happened and let the facts speak. Walter Douglas tried to respond. He issued a statement through his lawyer claiming the allegations were false, that Emma had fallen, that Thomas was a disgruntled ex-military with anger issues. Nobody believed him. The country club suspended his membership pending an investigation. His insurance company put him on administrative leave from his consulting work. 3 different news outlets ran stories about his settlement with the secretary, complete with quotes from her interview. Social media destroyed him. Hashtag Walter Douglas is a monster trended for 2 days. People dug up his company's old practices, the claims he'd denied, the families he'd hurt. In the court of public opinion, Walter Douglas was finished. Thursday night, Cheryl called. She was crying. "Are you happy now? My father can't leave his house. People are protesting outside. They egged his car. My mother had to check into a hotel because she can't handle the stress." He kicked Emma. "I know." The admission burst out of her like a dam breaking. "I know he did, and I hate him for it, but Thomas, he's still my father. You've destroyed him. He destroyed himself. I just told the truth." "The truth? You went to the media. You made this public. Do you know what this is doing to my whole family?" Devin lost his job. Jesse's wife left him. "We're all suffering because you couldn't just let it go." "Let it go." "Cheryl, he kicked our daughter hard enough to rupture her spleen, and you stood there and watched." The silence that followed was devastating. Cheryl didn't deny it, didn't defend herself. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered. "I should have protected her. I should have." "Yeah, you should have." Thomas hung up. He felt no satisfaction, no victory, just exhaustion. Friday afternoon, Walter Douglas showed up at Thomas's house. He looked terrible, unshaven, clothes rumpled, his usual commanding presence reduced to something smaller, broken. "I need you to make it stop," Walter said. His voice cracked. "Please, tell them I apologized. Tell them it was a mistake. I'll do anything." Thomas stood in his doorway, looking at the man who'd caused all this. A bully brought low, finally facing consequences. "No," Thomas said. "My life is ruined. My career, my reputation, everything. You've taken it all. You took it yourself when you hurt Emma. She's fine. The doctor said she'll recover completely. She's 8 years old, and her grandfather kicked her until her spleen ruptured. She's physically fine. But do you think she's not going to carry that? You think she's going to forget? Walter's face crumpled. I'm sorry. God help me, I'm sorry. I was drunk. I was angry. I wasn't thinking. You've had 2 weeks to apologize. Instead, you threatened me, sent your sons with guns, tried to get CPS to take my daughter. You're only sorry now because you're facing consequences. What do you want? Money? I'll pay whatever you. I don't want your money. I want you to turn yourself in to the police. Admit what you did. Face criminal charges. Walter stared at him. You know I can't do that. Then we're done here. Thomas closed the door. Behind it, he heard Walter sobbing, pleading, bargaining with empty air. Thomas walked back to the living room, where Emma was reading a book, safe and healing. He'd won. Not the way he'd wanted. Not with Walter in prison. Not with official justice, but in the way that mattered. Walter Douglas was ruined. His reputation destroyed, his family fractured, his comfortable life shattered. He'd face social consequences for the rest of his life. Would be remembered not as a successful businessman, but as the man who kicked his granddaughter. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. 3 months later, Thomas and Emma moved to a smaller house in a different neighborhood. Cheryl had filed for divorce, and Thomas hadn't contested it. They'd worked out custody. Emma would stay with Thomas primarily, with supervised visitation for Cheryl. The court had agreed after reviewing the evidence, including Cheryl's admission that she'd witnessed the assault and done nothing. Walter Douglas never faced criminal charges. The prosecutor had reviewed the case but ultimately decided that the time elapsed, the lack of video evidence, and Walter's destroyed reputation made prosecution unlikely to succeed. It was a practical decision, legally sound, and thoroughly unsatisfying. But Thomas had learned that justice existed in many forms. Sam Livingston and Raphael Hatch helped Thomas move, carrying boxes while Emma directed them with the seriousness of a general deploying troops. Preston showed up with pizza and beer, and they spent the evening in Thomas's new house, swapping stories and pretending the world was simpler than it was. You did good, Sam said quietly. You protected your daughter. That's what matters. Thomas nodded. He'd spent 20 years learning to fight, but the hardest battle had been the one fought without weapons, in living rooms and police stations in the court of public opinion. He'd won it not with violence, though that had played its part, but with patience, strategy, and the simple act of refusing to back down. Emma thrived in the new house. Her spleen healed completely, and within 6 months she was back to soccer, back to running and playing without fear. She saw a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma, and slowly the nightmares about the barbecue faded. Cheryl tried to rebuild her relationship with Emma, showing up for visits on time, bringing thoughtful gifts, making real efforts. Thomas didn't make it easy for her, but he didn't make it impossible either. Emma deserved a mother, even a flawed one. Walter Douglas moved to Florida. Thomas heard through the grapevine that he'd sold his house, taken early retirement, left Virginia entirely, running from the consequences, building a new life somewhere people didn't know his story. Thomas thought about pursuing him, about making sure the shame followed. But in the end, he let it go. Walter Douglas would carry what he'd done for the rest of his life. That was punishment enough. On a Saturday morning in June, almost 6 months after the barbecue, Thomas sat on his new deck watching Emma play in the backyard. She was teaching herself cartwheels, her body moving with the resilience of childhood, her laughter bright and unguarded. His phone rang. Cheryl. Hey, she said. I just wanted to say, Emma seems happy. Really happy. You're doing a good job. Thanks. I'm sorry, Thomas. For all of it. For not protecting her. For choosing my family over ours. For everything. Thomas looked at Emma, safe and whole, and felt some of the anger he'd carried for months begin to loosen. I appreciate you saying that. Do you think someday we could be friends? Not get back together. I know that's not happening. But friends? For Emma. Maybe. It'll take time. I understand. After they hung up, Thomas stayed on the deck, coffee growing cold in his hand, sun warm on his face. He thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, the handyman who'd spent his days avoiding his past, pretending he was something other than what the SEALs had made him. That man was gone. This new version of Thomas Gates had learned that you couldn't outrun who you were. You could only choose how to use it. Emma ran up to the deck, flushed and breathless. Daddy, did you see? I almost got it. I saw. Keep trying. You're getting closer. She ran back to practice, and Thomas smiled. This was victory, not the satisfying ending of a bad guy in handcuffs, but the quiet triumph of a daughter who felt safe enough to practice cartwheels in her own backyard. It was enough. It was everything. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.